So good to have everyone here, and I know that all of you have been really excited about this particular panel. I mean, hearing from Harvard, Stanford, OpenAI, and Google. And I just wanted to start off with a bit of context, right? So we've heard from Dan, we've heard from Carol around amazing use cases at Kaiser, at VA. And naturally, a lot of the questions are going to be, hey, what's going to come next? What could we build on foundational models, whether it's open or closed sourced? And I wanted to start off by framing. So in one of my earlier studies, I think this was just 2022 to put into context how fast things are developing. We were running a study using ChatGPT on clinical cases. And back then, as you are aware, it couldn't yet handle images, right? So you were actually typing in the results of ECG findings into ChatGPT, while doctors actually had to review images. And naturally, a lot of the critique then was, hey, it's not quite the same thing, right? It's fair peer review critique because you can't give text to ChatGPT and yet ask doctors to review images. And fast forward just 3 months from when we ran that study, guess what? ChatGPT actually took ECG images as well. And I think that's really speaking to the breathtaking pace of progress and how fast these models are becoming multimodal. And amongst the esteemed panel today, many of whom have actually published in top journals, Nature, lots of these amazing capabilities. And so I think today we really want to hear about, for those academia, industry, if you're building on these foundational models, developers, what's working, what's coming next. And I think this panel is going to be great at that. So without further ado, let's start off having the panel introduce yourself, and maybe let's do a fun thing. If you had to teach a class on one thing that you're totally not qualified to teach, what would that be? Maybe you can start with Khaled.
Yeah, hi, I'm Khaled. I'm a research scientist at Google DeepMind, working on medical AI. Did my PhD here at Stanford. I've been to these symposiums before in the past. Co-advisors were Daniel Rubin and Chris Ray. Yeah, so what would I teach? Something I'm not qualified for. On the physical side, I think like mixed martial arts. I think it's a good way to de-stress, boost confidence. So that's a good thing. On the intellectual side, maybe like ancient history or ancient civilization, and with a focus on how perhaps we sometimes lose technology or we forget technology, like this catastrophic forgetting of the human species. It's not only in AI models. So I think it's pretty interesting. I'll probably dig into that with some students. Yeah.
Cool. I'm Karan. I lead the health AI team at OpenAI. So we work on two broad things. The first is improving our models for healthcare. So thinking about the ways in which we can support users in getting access to information, helping them seek care, helping them advocate for themselves during complicated care journeys, and helping physicians deliver better care, even when their training or resourcing would otherwise prevent them from doing so. So we do a bunch of work to improve the models across a bunch of modalities and tasks and things like this. The second thing that we do is work on the implementation gap between where the models are at and where the ecosystem is at in terms of adoption. And that, the implementation gap, I think, has been increasing over time. And I think, some of the work that was just presented now, I think is excellent for kind of bridging some of that gap. And so at OpenAI, we don't think we're going to solve every last mile problem in healthcare. And so what we really think about is what does it take to really understand what that last mile looks like with our models and shorten that to 100 meters. And so we do various things to kind of work towards that. And one of the things that we've been doing recently was putting out the Health Bench work, which is kind of this broad evaluation of how large language models look in terms of performance and safety and health. In terms of what I would teach, I think it would probably be philosophy of mind. Not that so I'm not an expert. So I think the reason why would be I've been interested in philosophy of mind since I was younger. It's a lot of how I got into AI, thinking about intelligence and consciousness and how it all arises and things like this. And so that was an important part of my coming into AI. So probably teaching that would be fun.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Alsentzer. I'm an assistant professor of biomedical data science and courtesy appointment in computer science at Stanford. Our lab's research really focuses on how do we develop trustworthy machine learning and NLP for healthcare. And how we think about that is really how do we better incorporate medical domain knowledge into these models to make them more reliable and generalizable and fair in clinical settings. And so that might be things like leveraging external knowledge sources in knowledge graphs or training further on clinical data. And so I think the question, and I should also say before this, I joined Stanford in October. Before that, I was at Mass General Brigham, where we were working to deploy language models into the clinic. So also bring an implementation science perspective as well. The class I would like to teach, ever since I joined Stanford, there is a satellite campus. Many people don't know about this at Monterey, California. It's called Hopkins Marine Station. So my secret wish is that I want to teach scuba diving there so I can spend some time on that campus.
Hi, everyone. Marinka, Zitnik, Associate Professor of Biomedical Informatics at Harvard and the Broad Institute. Our lab focuses on developing AI models to enhance and empower biomedical discovery through the paradigm of creating AI scientists. We are very interested in questions regarding how we can develop and design better therapeutics and how we can take existing drugs and maximize their use through expanding indications, through identifying promising drug combinations, and think carefully about how we can bring together preclinical data in order to predict better clinical outcomes when we have preclinical data only, or how we can really leverage AI models to be able to make predictions across tens of thousands of diseases and across the entire space of currently existing drugs in order to find better drugs for everyone that has disease across the broad spectrum of areas. If I would be asked to teach a course outside of my comfort zone, let's say I would teach a course on stand-up comedy. I really laugh, I could laugh, but I think I'm better at, my timeline is better adjusted to meeting research deadlines than perhaps like punchlines. But I think it would be a really fun thing to do, especially nowadays. Thank you.
Okay, so as you can see, it will be a really fun, classes that the whole panel will be teaching. But let's move on to, I guess, what everyone's here for about, foundational models. And as you can see, we've got a very good mix of 50% academia, 50% of industry. So maybe we can make some of the questions a bit spicier in terms of, hey, how do you think about which model to build? Maybe let's start off by asking the question, where are we now, in terms of the sort of projects you're doing, how are foundational models influencing your work in healthcare, whatever it is you're doing, and maybe perhaps share one project or one particular insight that each of you are most excited about. Maybe start with Marinka.
Yeah, so the project that we're currently working on that I'm most excited about is a model called TX Agent. So TX Agent is an agentic pipeline that can reason about all drugs developed since 1939. And can do so in the context of over several hundreds of tools that this agent model can retrieve in real time and reason, and you leverage those tools in order to provide transparent reasoning traces to human experts. So the paradigm of agents is really taking off, and I'm sure many here in the audience are building agents of various kinds. I'm also particularly excited about how we are able to validate the outputs of these agentic models by currently emulating over 60 clinical trials using real-world evidence data on around 5 million patients, where we can take promising predictions that involve the use of drugs in specific patient population, that the model think that A would be more likely to be safe and more likely to be effective than existing drugs in that patient population, or for certain specific subtypes, there might be no existing drugs at all. So we can take those predictions and then we validate them by emulating clinical trials at scale using real-world evidence data. So that allows us to move beyond academic benchmarks, beyond generalizability tests. We do all that, of course, but really thinking about how we can integrate these model outputs that are increasingly more complex. It's not simply predicting scalars anymore, but really thinking about more complex structured outputs in form of reasoning traces, and how we can take those drug disease matching pairs in the context of patient populations and validate them at scale using real-world evidence data in this regard. So that's a model that we're very excited about. Those who are interested in checking it out, we have the code, the data sets, evaluation pipeline, everything is open. We are also crowdsourcing therapeutic questions globally, worldwide, working with a number of large foundations, as well as doing large-scale evaluation with clinical experts across a number of disease areas. And we'll be organizing a major competition at NeurIPS 2025 on drug decision-making and use of reasoning models for drug decision-making. So if you're interested in this area and you want to submit your favorite open source, closed source model, follow us. Thank you.
All right, I'll add, is that all right? Our lab's work really is kind of split into two camps. Half of it is more foundational methods development. The other half is more applied in nature. On the methods development side, we're really interested in how do you better model disease progression over longitudinal EHR data. Most multimodal data right now, even when you pair imaging and text, is a single note, a single image. How do you think about disease progression over time? With that, we also think about how do you avoid learning shortcut features in these models when you train them on clinical notes? As you might know, there's copy and pasted information, there's different note templates used by different hospitals, and so from a methods perspective, thinking about how to avoid actually learning clinically useful features. And then from an application perspective, we do a lot of work in the rare disease space. Rare diseases, I think, are really interesting from a foundation model perspective because they're this ultimate limited data setting where there are so few patients with each rare disease, but if you collect them all together, you get 1 in 10 patients who have a rare disease in the US. And so we're doing some work with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and Nigam Shah's lab in trying to identify rare disease patients based on their longitudinal EHR data. And then the cool part about this is being able to work directly with those patient orgs who are super energized in terms of getting their diagnosis. And I think it's really just this prime opportunity for foundation models.
Yeah, a lot of our team's work obviously is very related to foundation models. I mean, I think there's like 3 broad areas that we think about with respect to foundation models. One is how do you think about evaluating how well they're doing, especially in increasingly high fidelity situations that matter for increasing adoption. The second kind of area that we work on is around how do you improve performance. The third is how do you think about using the setting as a test bed for technical work on safety. So as we think about, for example, training reasoning models that really robustly try to improve human health, or models that are less likely to hallucinate or more reliable or things like this, using the setting to learn more about how to do that. I'll highlight maybe 2 kind of projects that we've been working on. One is the health bench work, which I mentioned as well, which is public, which is this broad evaluation of 5,000 realistic health conversations across a bunch of different areas and themes and axes. Covering, I think, what we hope is like a trifecta of 3 things. One is an evaluation that is meaningful, which is, as that evaluation goes up, hopefully as people use the models, people's health will improve. The second is that it's trustworthy, which means that it corresponds to the opinion of multiple doctors. And the third is that it's challenging or unsaturated, which means that there's room for today's frontier models to further improve. So Health Bench aims to hit that trifecta. It's now openly released, so you guys are able to kind of use it and build off of it. And we hope it's kind of an interesting framework that is useful not only for what we've been doing, but also for what other folks want to do in terms of building on top of it. And we built it really for 2 audiences. One is really the healthcare community, thinking about where the model is good, where the model is bad, what are some of the limitations, and where is that going. And the second is really the model developer community to use it as kind of a signal to hill climb and really further improve models. And I think we have folks work in both communities here. The second project is actually very related to Health Bench, and we kind of actually publicly talked about this work for the first time, kind of implicitly with the Health Bench work, which is just our work to improve the models. And so the models, OpenAI's models have improved pretty significantly in health. Prior to a year ago, there wasn't an explicit effort to improve our models in health, and they were just kind of getting better a little bit by accident or through generalization. But in recent months, the models have gotten better faster than in the last few years. And so now our smallest, cheapest model, 4.1 nano, is better than our best model from August. And that pace of improvement, I think, will continue for upcoming months. So as folks think about, what applications can we do, what is going to make sense a few months from now, I would just adjust your expectations that I think the models are going to get better faster than they were before.
And yeah, thank you for Health Bench, by the way. I think it's a great contribution to the community. We ingested it and definitely be looking closely into it. I think what excites me the most about foundation models is it in some ways lowers the barrier to going after ambitious projects. So for example, just a couple of years ago in my PhD, I was working on very scope narrow tasks such as seizure classification from EEG and tasks like that. But with these foundation models, they're so general. There's this natural language interface. They have this broad knowledge, and they just keep improving at such a rapid pace. It allows us to think of projects that are a lot more closer to real-world tasks. And so that's why I'm most excited about our project on AIMI. In AIMI, it's a research exploration where we're trying to build intentionally a diagnostic medical intelligence that's conversational and multimodal and empathic. So in AIMI, essentially, we're able to now actually. So how we used to kind of look for, if we had symptoms and we wanted to learn more about our symptoms, we would either use Google Search, ChatGPT, Gemini, these general models. With AIMI, we're wondering, okay, what if we're intentional with these user health concerns? Should we specialize these models in any way? Should they ask follow-up questions in a specific guided way? So that we increase the accuracy of getting, for example, to the right diagnosis. So those are the kinds of questions we ask at AIMI, and the way we evaluate that is by running these studies, and we had to also innovate in the evaluation. We run these studies in a safe way with patient actors, and we're actually able to go through the whole history taking and diagnosis. And to do history taking, you need to have that general conversational skills and broad knowledge. So that's what excites me the most about that unlock with foundational models.
Yeah, I loved all those insights. So what I'm really hearing is, wow, all these foundational models, they're not just getting better in healthcare, they're accelerating, right? And that's hugely exciting. And I think the next question myself, and probably many in the audience would have, especially those who are building on these models, is kind of like, what are the strong versus fail modes, right, that you're building, developing in? What are things to look out for? What are some surprising capabilities where, hey, it kind of works out of the box? Karan, you alluded to, demonstrating a lot of healthcare capabilities almost by accident, right, that these were discovered. And so maybe you want to start with Karan and then move on to Khaled. I think that both you and OpenAI, Google have done immense efforts wrangling huge amounts of evaluating teams. I think it was like 200 doctors in 60 countries, right, for HealthBench. And then with AIMI as well, with your two recent, I think, Nature publications as well that just came out. So do we want to start with Karan first?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest kind of miracle or surprise over the years has been the incredible generalization of general chat training to performing better in health situations. For the most part, most of the models that you use to do anything in health, whether that's user-facing applications or physician-facing applications, have primarily been shaped by data that's not actually health-related. And that's true of basically all of the models historically. And so people have trained them to be general, helpful chat assistants without specifically targeting health data. And then the thing that's happened, surprisingly, is that the models are also pretty helpful at health. And that wasn't really a super deliberate decision by anybody, but it's just kind of worked out for the most part. And it's not been ideal in a lot of ways, but that's kind of like the backdrop for the model's capabilities now, is that like people have just trained them to be helpful chat assistants with like work that came out of Google and OpenAI in like 2020 and 2021. And since then, and that's been working, and that's kind of the foundation of models like ChatGPT and now Gemini and things like this. And that's just been working, and that's kind of the foundation. And I think the end result of that is models that are really incredible at doing things when you provide them a lot of context. And so for those of you who have used ChatGPT in applications related to health, whether that's for yourself or for your family, you know that if you give it a lot of information, it's able to give you a lot of information back. That's really helpful. But if you give it something that doesn't have a lot of context, then it's not really going to be likely to help you. And so writing a good prompt with a lot of details is important. I think one thing, and that reflects the challenge as well, like the models might not be the best at knowing when to seek context or knowing when to be uncertain or things like this out of the box, because that isn't necessarily what's trained for a general chat assistant. So as we've been working and understanding the performance of models and the limitations of models that are trained to be general chat assistants and understanding how to make them even better at health, we've been focusing on areas like context seeking when appropriate, for example, like asking additional questions when it might provide additional information, or for example, performing better in under-resourced contexts where, for example, the standard of care or epidemiological practices or things like this might differ, or access to resources might differ, or multilingual contexts or things like this, where you don't get full coverage just by training to be a general chat assistant. And so we think a lot about where is the delta between general chat assistant and what does it take to be kind of like this effectively superhuman assistant to humans and to ordinary users and doctors. And so those are some of the areas that we've come up against.
Yeah, I've been so. We when we ran these studies with AIMI, we looked at a bunch of different criteria, over 50 axes. Some of them were more about clinical accuracy, and others were softer metrics, kind of like how the patient felt talking with AIMI, and did they feel like they were being heard? Would they come again? What was the model being empathic, and so on. So we thought that, okay, since the model probably has seen more data, that it can probably get to higher diagnostic accuracy. So that wasn't too surprising. But what was surprising is the better performance on some of the softer metrics, and the patients actually, or patient actors, as of now. The patient actors feeling like they actually prefer to speak with the model because the model, I guess, has more time to write out, like hearing them out and being empathic, and so I guess that was a surprising plus. But there's still a lot of challenges. So something I still get surprised by is, these models out of the box, they're trained, as Karan was saying, like just general skills, and the medical data like X-rays, ECGs, they're probably not going to be that represented in the pre-training data and so forth. So you might think, okay, how should I specialize this model, make it even better in these use cases? Well, let's kind of tail patch, like just continue training on more medical tasks. So we thought that that's sounds like a reasonable approach to take. When you fine tune on medical tasks, all of a sudden you start losing other skills. We trained on ECGs and all these modalities, and now the model lost its ability to do OCR, for example. And so it feels like there are lots of challenges with this catastrophic forgetting. How do you integrate data in a way to get the mixture correct? And it's pretty, the training pipeline could be pretty delicate. So I think that surprises me in some ways, as how you do a bit of training on something like that's OOD, and then all of a sudden you lose other skills that you really wanted. So what we ended up doing in our most recent publication, Multimodal AIMI, is actually let's take these models out of the box, and then let's build on top of them. So let's work on the inference layer. Let's teach the model how to reason through a conversation, a consultation, through through the inference layer of maybe giving it guidelines at inference, so additional information, or telling it that there are different phases, and it should transition between history taking phase to providing the diagnosis. We should provide it with these kind of directions at the inference layer, and that way you don't need to mess with the brittle training regime and all those resources. You can just make use of all the updates from the base model and just work on the inference layer. So the training can be a bit brittle, and that's pretty surprising to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think just as a follow-on to that, so clearly, even though these models have really amazing capabilities, sometimes especially around evaluation, around, hey, what are these trade-offs, right? A lot of times it's maybe trial and error. I mean, on that note, we'd love to hear as well from Emily and Marinka, right? What else do you think is hard? What major challenges are you encountering when trying to either apply or evaluate foundation models in healthcare? I know, Emily, you've done a lot of work around sort of diversity, equity of the data sets as well, and some of these outcomes. So I'd love if both of you could speak to that.
Sure, I can start. I think one of the largest challenges, and here when I'm referring to these models, I'm talking about generative capabilities, right? You can use foundation model in a predictive setting. But when you're working with generative models, the non-determinism, right, of these models is a huge challenge. Anyone who has tried prompting can recognize you change slight wording of the prompt, you can get a different output. And I think as a result of that, it's really hard for users, both model developers and end users, to understand what are potential spurious correlations or slight changes in their prompt that might impact your downstream use case. So there was this great paper that just came out this year from UW that looks at what they call semantic linkage. This is this idea, if you mention some concept in your prompt, how might that condition or change the output? So to give you an example of something like that, you might have the prompt, he likes Jell-O, he is a blank. And the model will have a high likelihood of outputting bus driver. Or she is a doctor, her favorite song is Stayin' Alive. Think about a clinically relevant use case here. We often have these pathognomonic ways we describe clinical features, so like blueberry rash and blueberry muffin rash. And you can imagine that if you just mention in your prompt, patient was not NPO, ate a blueberry muffin that morning. And then if you ask, they'll give information about the neonate and all the different features they have, and then the higher likelihood now as a result of mentioning congenital CMV as a result of mentioning blueberry muffin rash, or blueberry muffin, not even the rash part, in your prompt, goes way up as a result. So there's all these sort of unexpected ways that we don't yet know and can't yet characterize about the models. I think that's coupled with the challenge of evaluation, right? Right now, a common approach we use in the field is using a language model as a judge for evaluation, and that's very scalable. We don't fully understand the challenges of using language models as a judge. We know that language models can prefer their own outputs. And so thinking about how we can actually reliably conduct this sort of evaluation is really challenging.
Yeah, so I would agree with everything that was said, but I would offer another perspective. So over the last several years, our approach was to using foundation models broadly as a field was that we start with some pre-trained language model or perhaps text vision model, and then we fine-tune that model in parameter-efficient way through prompt tuning, prefix tuning. There are just an entire field of techniques that allow us to adapt that pre-trained model, often through a small amount of labeled data on a variety of downstream tasks. And I think it's a very interesting perspective that it has several limitations. One of them was catastrophic forgetting that was mentioned earlier, very challenging process of fine-tuning these models that mean that they can lose some of the skills and capabilities that the pre-training model has that fine-tuned model doesn't have anymore. And we also need to continue fine-tune these models when new data become available. So for example, in context of drugs, when a drug is approved and goes to the market, it gets a different name than the compound that it was used during the development process. And there is actually a committee in the US that selects and decides what is the name for the drug that will be used in healthcare context, so that the name is such that it doesn't overlap with the names of other drugs. That's also not a common English word, so that it minimizes the chance that healthcare professionals, patients would mix that name of the drug with some names of other drugs, for example. But practically what that means is that when you ask your question about this drug and use the name of the drug, which is this new name that the drug got after the approval, on your favorite fine-tuned model, performance will be close to random simply because the name that we use to refer to this drug is this approved name of the drug, which is non-common English words. So it's kind of hard to relate it to anything that exists in the knowledge base. So we would need to fine-tune the model again and again. So I'm very excited about principles that can extend this idea of contextualized learning beyond what would I think of our early examples of contextual learning that we relied on over the last several years, which were all about fine-tuning, parameter-efficient fine-tuning, and prompting, or ragging in the last 1.5 years. And so the way we generally think about that is that we train models to use different kinds of tools. We don't train models to train them to predict specific kinds of labels. And those tools can be models sending API requests to external resources, or models querying another foundation model, potentially foundation model that is not just text or image model. There are many data types that we have in healthcare and medicine that go beyond text and images. For example, high-dimensional transcriptomics readouts of tumor microenvironment. How can we represent those? There are 20,000 dimensional vectors of real numbers that represent gene expression values so that they are not easily captured in a text or image. And so when we train these models in slightly different ways to use tools and use them effectively, they can query external databases in real time, so they are never obsolete. And second, they can interact with other data types and other data modalities that go beyond images and beyond text, which I think it's very exciting to expand the scope and applicability of these models more broadly in healthcare, and also enable reverse translation, going from healthcare back to medical research, which often is more than images and text.
All right, thank you. Do we have time for one more audience Q&A, I think?
Thank you so much. Khaled, thank you for mentioning catastrophic forgetting. And I was very disappointed 2 years ago when I saw that performance actually you heard when you tried to specialize them. So the question to you guys, since you are the only ones that can have this mix because of the scale that you need to improve, how much attention are you guys paying to medicine, like when you're training the foundational models? And Karan was mentioning that the models are going to be getting better. That means that you're incorporating specific data into the pipelines of the general models, or like how much attention is OpenAI and Google paying at updating the generalist models in the very important specific domain of medicine?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. We have a few different projects going on. So mainly talking about the experience from my project, but for example, we have some folks that are working on upstreaming to Gemini and improving Gemini in health. And we have other teams that are working directly with the product surfaces, like AI overviews or Google search. And there are others that are working on developing open source models like the MedGemma that was recently released. And that's kind of trying to use the resources and expertise we have access to kind of, in a way, it's really like redoing the whole training, but with medical data from the start, or an emphasis on medical data from the start, and then open sourcing that for developers to have a better starting point. So there are these different projects. I think that the projects I work on are a bit more focused on what's the best we can do with the intention of doing a diagnostic conversation.
Yeah, and to quickly answer on our side, we think of our work as, the generalist models are effectively working in many different verticals, and one of those verticals is healthcare, and that matters a lot. And so we think a lot about what does it take to measure and improve performance for many different verticals that are safety critical. And so healthcare is one of them, and there's been increasing emphasis on that in the last year.
I've got a question for the panel as well. I think many of the audience whom are building, right? A bit of a slightly, maybe spicier take, because I know half of you are working on more open models, clinical BERT, right? And sort of graph foundational models. And, obviously Google and OpenAI are working more on closed models. So for those building, maybe they have many questions, right? What are kind of the trade-offs for open building on top of an open versus a closed model? What do we need to be thinking about? Because I get asked all the time, hey, Ethan, what sort of models, is it the cloud, is it OpenAI, which one should I be building on top of? Maybe you want to start with Emily. I think you have got some interesting takes on that.
So I think a lot about what data are these models actually trained on? And going back, I think, to the example that Marinka gave about drugs, the example that I was giving about diagnostic reasoning, it can be really hard to know what kind of biases might exist in your data if we don't have a good sense of what data these models are actually trained on. So I think, if I were to have a wish list to that side of the table over there, it's even understanding like the classes of models that these or the classes of data, right? Like, is this trained on EHR data or not? Is it trained on mimic data, which is one of the most common? I think that is kind of the bar for what I see as most useful about open source models relative to closed source models. The other benefit, too, of working with open source models is that you can have access to the actual next token probability. So, right, if you think about how these models work, there's some probability distribution about what is the next token you're trying to predict. There's a lot of cool methods that you can develop in terms of confidence-based estimates or things like that leverage that data that we have access to with open source models compared to closed source models. From a privacy perspective, I think that's not as much of an issue nowadays because there are systems right now to use closed source models in a HIPAA compliant way. Most hospitals right now that are deploying these models are leveraging models through Microsoft Azure, which has HIPAA compliant. But it's really about, for future capabilities, what can we build off of?
Great. What about sort of generalist versus specialist models, right? There's always this debate, startups are saying, hey, we need to fine tune a special healthcare model versus someone else, a VC probably is going to say, hey, OpenAI is going to come tomorrow and eat you up. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this debate around general versus specialist models. You want to thoughts about that?
Happy to start, perhaps. So it's clear that generalist models are getting better and better and covering more and more of the verticals. I think that there will be a continual need for some form of adaptation of generalist models towards specific use cases, but that type of adaptations might not be traditional fine-tuning as we have been using it over the last several years, for example, but perhaps more and more could be done in context or at inference time to just equip the models with broader contextual capabilities that are relevant for the use cases that we care about without necessarily manipulating the underlying model weights through fine-tuning strategies.
I think, I think in the short term, we should be building specialist models to see what's the max performance we can get in a specific task. But also, there could be some downsides, like in order to then have a specialist model, you need to fork off the generalist path. And the generalist path is going with high momentum. I believe that the generalist models are taking advantage of this transfer learning, and they are getting better, and their scope is increasing. So I think there are advantages to both, but ultimately, my bet would be that these specialist models get folded into the generalist, so that we can make use of the transfer of knowledge.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think specialist models can be great for research and also for showing the art of the possible, which has been an excellent place for them to shine. But I think at the end of the day, especially as the pace of the generalist model improvement kind of continues, it's probably the likely path. A second thing is I think the specialized model debate tends to confound like two things. One is like whether you do specialized training or not, and the second is whether the model only contains medical stuff or not. And so whether you do specialized training, I think it is definitely true that doing specialized training for verticals helps. And the interesting thing is that the general models have so much capacity to learn more in specialized domains that doing specialized training on the generalist models actually works really well. And so I think that's the ideal solution, especially for the folks building big models that people use. But obviously that has complexities with respect to like how do you roll that out and get that in and show the art of the possible before you can do that.
I completely agree with the need for some sort of specialized either training or incorporation and inference. If we think about the types of data that are in our large general domain models nowadays, it's patient data that might be represented in case reports in PubMed or might be represented in textbooks. So you've got either these classic textbook definitions or you've got PubMed, these atypical definitions of patient cases. What you're missing is this distribution of patient presentations that you see in EHR data. And one challenge with that, of course, right, with PHI, that we can't necessarily just, at least right now, collate all of the EHR data and then do further training on that. Another complication, too, is that different hospitals will have different clinical practices. Just to give a concrete example of this, antibiotic treatment is very different in different hospitals. There's an antibiogram depending on the susceptibility of a given pathogen in a given region. And so for thinking about how do we actually then end up using these models for downstream treatments, we'll need to do some sort of customization for that. And then I think there's kind of there's three reasons why you might want to use some sort of clinical specialization. One, incorporating medical domain knowledge in some way. I think we all agree that that can be beneficial. Two, maybe there's some biases that we're learning from general domain data that we don't actually want to include in our model. Is there some way either we can remove that biases or think about more selectively what data we include when training these models for clinical applications? And then third, there's a real cost argument too. We've done some work that looks at you can when you train on clinical data, you can end up getting a smaller data or a smaller model when you train on the same number of flops. And I think, as we think about scaling these models, many different models downstream, especially in this era right now where hospitals are very cost sensitive, I think there is an argument for smaller models that are task specific for a very specific task, like information extraction or summarization, where you don't need to know everything under the sun.
All right, great. And I think just to wrap up this panel, maybe one sentence from each of you. What are you most excited about, what's coming next, right? Is it multimodality? Is it agentic workflow? I mean, speaking back to 2022, right, when I had no idea that ECG interpretation, right, was going to be something that could be uploaded into ChatGPT. And I know that some of you maybe can't review too much about upcoming roadmaps, so feel free to say whatever is, you're most excited about that you think might be coming next.
We're very excited to actually test models like AIMI with real patients. So we have an ongoing study now with Harvard where we're doing that. We're carrying that out. So excited to see the results when those come out. Also very excited about just in general going from natural language interaction over text to audio-video interaction and seeing kind of, I guess it's more of a human-computer interaction question on how's that gonna unlock a lot of things for doing consultations. And then reasoning models are really exciting to me. I think a lot of the methods we've done so far in the last couple of years, we try to bake in some domain specialization on how we should reason in a medical setting. But I think maybe in a year or 2 years from now, hopefully these reasoning models are so much more improved that they're able to figure out how to reason on their own without us doing, again, a manual curation and baking in. I'm excited about that too.
I alluded to being excited about the pace of improvement of models in coming months, and that's definitely an important thing. I think, again, we're going to see a faster improvement in the coming months than previously, which is exciting. I think another big piece that I'm excited about is I think we're going to reach a breaking point in a good way where the implementation gap, the gap between where the models are at and where the ecosystem is at, is actually going to reach a breaking point where people are just going to be like, there is so much inefficiency in the health system, there's labor shortages, there's so much cost, my margins are so thin. And I sense that part of my role is partnerships, and in the last 6 months, I've sensed a palpable shift when I talk to healthcare executives and how they're thinking about Gen AI, as they refer to it. It's pretty exciting, and I think there's going to be a pretty big shift towards adoption. I'm very excited to see more quick iteration on QI type studies, including the one that was just presented and the one that Khaled and team are working on at Google and things like this, because I think that is going to be the kind of thing that creates a clear template and evidence of what you can do with these models, whether they're in physician-facing applications or user-facing applications. And in the end, I think we're going to have this shift in Overton window around the use of AI to promote human health. I think a lot of that will happen in coming months.
I agree with everything you all said. I'm really excited to see innovation in the human-AI collaboration front. I think most of the ways that we are using AI models right now are, use an AI model to draft a note and then clinician edits it, or use an AI to generate a diagnosis and then clinician reviews that. And I think we need more creative ways to actually leverage these AI models where clinicians are actually thinking and going through these decision-making processes. So whether that is pre-charting and coming up with a list of questions that a doctor should ask during the patient visit, or not when they're writing the note, but when they're actually going through on rounds in the hospital, trying to come up with the diagnosis or next steps for the patient. So thinking about those kind of ways to bring AI into the clinical decision process where those decisions are actually happening.
To add to that, I'm very excited about AI collaboration in the context of medical research as well. So when we are seeing that these models can also have started to generate useful, increasingly testable hypotheses and research plans that can then transition into experimental workflows that can validate those hypotheses or generate new data. But I hope that we will be realizing these campaigns that will go from AI to experiments through multiple rounds of improvement and iteration. and connecting preclinical data from medical research with clinical data in interesting novel ways, for example, through connecting brains on a chip through organoid models and AI models in a more self-evolving loop to generate plans, generate experiments, new data that can retrain the model or inform the model for the next round of experiments. And there are examples of success, early examples of success. Just today in Nature Medicine has been published a work that reports the first phase 2A clinical trial of an AI-enabled drug that is both first-in-class small molecule TNIK inhibitors where also target was in a way enhanced through the discovery of, through the use of Gen AI models on multi-omics patient-derived data. So I think there are just tremendous amount of opportunities in that space as well to just catalyze biomedical discovery at large.
All right, and on that note, do you want to give it up for amazing sort of panel?